I am Samuel Harrington, 68 years old. To my son-in-law, I was a walking bank account. To my own daughter, I was a problem to be managed. They thought the old contractor had gotten slow, that his mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. They were about to find out that the foundation I built my life on was made of steel. It all started with a single text message from my lawyer, a message that lit the fuse on a bomb that would shatter their carefully constructed world. Before I tell you what that message said, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And please like and subscribe if you believe that respect for your elders is non-negotiable. The silence in my house was a familiar companion. After my wife Beatrice passed, it became a permanent resident. But on Sundays, the silence felt different. It was a silence of anticipation. Sunday was Lila's day, my daughter, my only child. I stood in front of the closet, running my hand over a row of neatly pressed suits. Beatrice always said a man could conquer the world in a well-fitting suit. I chose the navy blue one, her favorite. As I put it on, I could almost feel her hands straightening the lapels for me. This house, every brick, every floorboard was a testament to our life together. I poured the foundation, and she breathed a soul into it. Now that soul seemed to exist only in photographs. I glanced at her picture on my dresser, her smile as bright as the Florida sun. You know, she's just like you, Beatrice, I'd often whisper to the photo. The smile, the sharp mind. But lately something was different. Something was missing in her eyes. The Sunday dinners at her house had become my lighthouse, the one bright spot in a quiet week. It was a reminder that I wasn't just a widower rattling around in a house that was too big for him. I was a father, a patriarch. I was adjusting my tie in the mirror, practicing the smile I would wear for the evening when my phone buzzed on the dresser. I figured it was my medication reminder, but when I picked it up, a cold dread washed over me. It was a text from a name I rarely saw on a weekend, Marcus Hale, attorney. The message itself was a single line typed in all capital letters, like a shout through the screen. Mr. Harrington, don't go anywhere. Call me immediately. Urgent. Urgent. Marcus Hale wasn't a man who used that word lightly. In 25 years as my lawyer, he'd never sent a message like this. The air in the room grew thick. The quiet house suddenly felt oppressive. My heart, which had settled into the slow, steady rhythm of old age, began to pound against my ribs. Every instinct told me my normal Sunday dinner had just ended before it even began. I hit call without a second's hesitation. The phone felt cold against my ear. It rang once, twice. Then Marcus's sharp, no-nonsense voice cut through the line. Samuel. Where are you? Are you alone? I'm at home. Marcus about to leave for Lila's. What's wrong? There was a pause, heavy hesitation that told me the news was bad. Someone just tried to secure a $3.2 million loan against your commercial properties. Samuel, they used a power of attorney with your signature on it. The world tilted. I leaned against the dresser, my knuckles white. A power of attorney. I didn't sign any. My voice trailed off as a memory surfaced sharp and sickening. Derek, my son-in-law, at my kitchen table a few weeks ago, a thick stack of papers, his charming smile. Just some standard investment paperwork pops. Sign here, here, and here. He'd flipped through the pages so quickly. I had trusted him. I had trusted my daughter's husband. Samuel, are you there? Marcus's voice was urgent. Yes, I'm here, I said, my own voice sounding distant. I'm here. Despite the earthquake that had just ripped through my world, I decided to go to dinner, but now it wasn't a social visit. It was a reconnaissance mission. When I got in Derek's new premium crossover, the smell of fresh leather almost choked me. I had helped them with the down payment for it. An investment in his professional image, he'd called it. Great news, Pops. Derek said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. That commercial real estate deal I told you about. It's about to pop. We're looking at a 35, maybe 45% return in 24 months. We just need to move fast. I just nodded. I looked at Lila, my daughter. She was staring out the window, her thumb scrolling endlessly on her phone screen. She was a million miles away. Normally, she'd be engaged asking smart questions, questioning Derek's numbers. My Lila had a brilliant mind for business, but the Lila next to me was a ghost. How's work, honey? I asked, trying to pull her back. She flinched slightly. Oh, it's fine, Dad. Busy. The answer was clipped devoid of detail. The rest of the ride was filled with Derek's empty chatter about leveraging assets and aggressive growth strategies. It was all noise. All I could hear was Marcus's voice in my head. $3.2 million. At their house, the dinner table was set beautifully, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. I watched them. I watched how Derek would talk and Lila would nod. I watched how they'd share a quick glance when they thought I wasn't looking. I was no longer a father at dinner. I was an investigator studying suspects. To test the waters, I feigned forgetfulness. You know, Derek, that stack of papers I signed. My memory isn't what it used to be. Could you bring them by tomorrow? I'd like to read the fine print. Derek's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Lila froze her fork halfway to her mouth. Don't you worry about that, Pops, Derek said with a forced laugh. It's all complicated financial jargon. That's what you have me for. Trust me, everything is going perfectly. And then he delivered the final blow. You know we were talking, he said, gesturing between himself and Lila. This big old house you're in, it's a lot for one person. If you sold it, you'd have so much more liquid capital to put into these bigger deals. We could find you a nice, safe condo. We're just worried about you, Dad. He said it with a look of fake concern on his face. He wanted to sell the house Beatrice and I had built the home where we raised our daughter. He wanted to sell my memories to fund his schemes. I looked at Lila, hoping to see a flicker of protest, a sign that my daughter was still in there. But she just looked down at her plate, her silence ablaze in my heart. I knew then this wasn't just about money. This was a war for the soul of my family. And I had just learned the enemy was sitting right across the table from me. My hand was trembling as I held the phone to my ear. The familiar comfort of my own home had evaporated, replaced by a chilling tension. Marcus's voice came through the line, sharp and devoid of pleasantries. Samuel, where are you? Are you alone? I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. I'm at home. Marcus about to leave for Lila's. I'm alone. What's wrong? Your text. Forget the text. He cut in. His tone was a razor's edge. Stay where you are. Lock your doors. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I walked over to the front door and slid the deadbolt across. The metallic click echoed in the silent house. It felt unnervingly final. Okay, Marcus, I'm listening. You're scaring me. He took a deep breath. It was the sound of a lawyer preparing to deliver devastating news. I received a call about an hour ago from a senior risk manager at National Bank's Commercial Lending Division, a man named Thompson. He knows me from the old days. He was calling as a professional courtesy before flagging an account for fraud. My blood ran cold. Fraud. My account. Your business account. Samuel. Someone tried to secure a $3. $2 million loan against your entire portfolio of commercial properties. The buildings on Oak Avenue, the industrial zone, everything. They were trying to leverage the core of your legacy. The words didn't make sense. It was like hearing a foreign language. $3.5 million. Marcus, that's impossible. It has to be a mistake, a clerical error. No one has access to those accounts but me. It wasn't a clerical error, Samuel. Marcus's voice was grim. The application was submitted with a fully executed power of attorney. It gives the holder sweeping control over your financial assets. According to the document, you signed it over 4 weeks ago. My mind raced a frantic search through recent memories. A power of attorney. That's a serious document, the kind of thing I would only ever sign in Marcus's office after reading every single word. I never signed anything like that, Marcus. I would know. I would have called you immediately. Think Samuel. He pressed gently but firmly. Have you signed any legal or financial documents at all in the last month? Anything outside of my office, anything that seemed rushed. And then the image hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was so clear, so vivid, I felt like I was reliving it. The gleaming granite of my kitchen island, the smell of coffee in the air. Derek, my son-in-law, was sitting across from me, a wide, confident smile on his face. A thick stack of papers was fanned out between us. He had his fancy silver pen in his hand. Just some standard paperwork for the new investment fund pops. Derek had said, his voice smooth as honey. It's a real estate trust, very secure, but there's a lot of red tape to get it set up. Just need your signature here on the ownership forms, here on the risk disclosure, and here on the account authorization. He had flipped the pages quickly, his finger tapping on each signature line. I remembered feeling a little overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it. The pages were filled with dense paragraphs of legal text. "Shouldn't Marcus look at this first?" I had asked. Derek had laughed a friendly, dismissive sound. "Oh, we'll send him courtesy copies. This is just to get the ball rolling. The opportunity is time sensitive, you know. We don't want to get bogged down in lawyerly delays and miss our window." Lila had been there too, standing by the sink, her back to us. She was quiet that morning. I had assumed she was just tired, but now her silence seemed deafening. I had trusted him because he was my daughter's husband. I had signed where he pointed my 68-year-old eyes skimming the headers without absorbing the details. I had signed my life's work away at my own kitchen table. "Samuel, are you still there?" Marcus's voice pulled me back from the sickening memory. I had to wet my lips before I could speak. He gave me papers. I said, my voice a hoarse whisper, "Derek, my son-in-law." He said it was for an investment, a thick stack of them. A heavy sigh came through the phone. It was the sound of Marcus's worst fears being confirmed. The old trick. You hide a venomous snake in a basket of harmless ones. He must have slipped the power of attorney document into the middle of that stack. The signature page would look just like all the others. The bank. Did they approve the loan? I asked, dreading the answer. "No," Marcus said, and I felt a small flicker of relief. Thompson at the bank thought it was suspicious. A loan of that size liquidating the assets of a man with your financial history. It set off red flags. He said the applicant was pushing hard for a rapid wire transfer to a newly opened LLC. He did some digging, found my name as your long-term counsel, and called me first. We got lucky, Samuel. Unbelievably lucky. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollowed out, violated. The money was one thing. It was a staggering amount, but I could recover. It was the betrayal that struck me to the core. A betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound, and a darker thought began to creep in. Lila. I said her name barely audible. Did she know about this? "I don't know, Samuel," Marcus said softly. The power of attorney only lists Derek Morrison as the agent. Her name isn't on the loan application itself, but she was there when I signed the papers. I finished for him. My heart ached with a fresh wave of pain. My daughter. My smart, capable daughter. Was she a willing accomplice, or was she a fool just like me? Which answer was worse? For a moment, I was filled with a white-hot rage. I wanted to drive over to their house right now, kick down the door, and confront them. I wanted to see the look on Derek's face when his perfect little scam fell apart. "I'm going over there," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "No." Marcus's command was absolute. "That is the worst thing you could do right now, Samuel. They don't know that we know. That is our only advantage. If you confront them, they will cover their tracks, destroy evidence, maybe even try to disappear. Right now, we are in control. You cannot give that up. Do you understand me?" I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. He was right. An emotional outburst would be a fatal mistake. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a strategic battle, and I had been a fool for too long. The kind, trusting old man was gone. He had vanished the moment Marcus said the word fraud. The man left in his place was a builder, a man who knew that before you could build something new, you first had to tear the old rotten structure down to the studs. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, now cleared of all emotion. "I understand. So what do we do next?" I ended the call with Marcus, my hand steady, but my soul shaking. For a long moment, I just stood there in the suffocating silence of my home. My first instinct was to call Lila, to scream down the phone to demand an explanation. My second was to get in my car and drive anywhere far away from the wreckage of my family. But Marcus's final words echoed in my mind. They don't know that we know. That is our only advantage. He was right. Raw emotion was a luxury I could not afford. Anger was a fire that would only consume me and leave them unscathed. I needed ice in my veins, not fire. I needed a plan. So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I straightened my suit jacket, smoothed my tie, and composed my face into a mask of grandfatherly warmth. I picked up the small gift I had bought for them, a bottle of wine, and walked out of my house. I was no longer a father going to dinner. I was a soldier walking into enemy territory playing the part of a fool to map out their fortifications. The moment I stepped into their house, the facade of Normally was almost overwhelming. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air. Soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner. It was a perfect picture of domestic bliss, a scene from a magazine. But to me, it felt like a beautifully constructed stage set for a tragedy. Derek greeted me at the door with a booming laugh and a clap on the shoulder. Pops, there you are. We were getting worried. Come on in, dinner's almost ready. Lila came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice quiet. She gave me a quick prefunctor hug, a gesture that felt more like a habit than an act of affection. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. Her gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if looking at me directly would turn her to stone. We sat at their polished dining table, the three of us. The conversation was light and meaningless. Derek talked about his golf game. Lila mentioned a problem with the landscaping. I listened, nodding and smiling where appropriate. But I wasn't really listening to their words. I was watching them. I watched the way Derek's hand rested on Lila's shoulder, a gesture that looked less like comfort and more like ownership. I watched the way Lila's fork pushed food around her plate, never lifting much of it to her mouth. She was a bundle of nervous energy, a violin string pulled too tight. I decided it was time to test the waters. I let a thoughtful pause hang in the air, then turned to Derek with a slightly confused expression, the one I used when I couldn't find my reading glasses. You know, Derek, I began, my tone casual. That big stack of papers I signed the other week. My old memory isn't what it used to be. Could you bring them by the house tomorrow? I'd just like to read through the fine print again for my own peace of mind. The effect was instantaneous. Derek's easy smile faltered for just a second. Lila's fork clattered onto her plate, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. They exchanged a look, a flash of pure panic so quick that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. Derek recovered first, letting out a forced chuckle. Oh, Pops, you don't need to trouble yourself with all that complicated financial jargon. It would just give you a headache. That's what you pay me for, to handle the details. You just need to relax and trust me. Everything is moving along perfectly. He patted my hand condescendingly. Trust me. The words hung in the air, a bitter poison. I looked at Lila, hoping for some sign of dissent, some flicker of the honest, intelligent daughter I had raised. But she just stared down at her plate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her silence a confession. Then Derek, overplaying his hand, delivered the final devastating blow. You know, Dad, Lila and I were talking, he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. This big house you're rattling around in all by yourself, it's a lot of upkeep for one person. We worry about you. We were thinking if you sold it, you'd have so much more liquid capital to put into these bigger deals we're planning. We could find you a beautiful, safe condo much more manageable. It just makes financial sense. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sell the house I had built with Annette, the home where we had raised Lila, the place where every corner held a memory of a life filled with love and hard work. He was talking about liquidating my past, my memories, my heart and soul, as if it were nothing more than a stock certificate to be traded. I looked across the table at my daughter, the woman who had taken her first steps on those hardwood floors. I pleaded with my eyes for her to say something, to tell her husband he had gone too far. But she said nothing. She just picked up her wine glass and took a long sip. Her gaze fixed on the wall behind me, refusing to meet mine. And in her silence, I got my answer. It wasn't just Derek. It was both of them. My son-in-law was the architect of the plan, but my own daughter was his willing accomplice. The drive home from that dinner was the longest of my life. I didn't say a word, and they didn't press me. I think they mistook my cold, silent fury for the weary resignation of an old man they had finally beaten. It was an error in judgment that would cost them dearly. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study, the house dark around me, replaying every deceitful smile, every empty hug, every lie. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. But as the sun began to cast a gray light through the window, something else began to burn through the grief. It was a cold, hard resolve. By the time I walked into Marcus Hale's office at 9:15 a.m. sharp, The heartbroken father had been replaced by the meticulous builder. I was there to review a blueprint for demolition. Marcus's office was an oasis of calm and order. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with law to a large mahogany desk and the faint smell of coffee and old paper. It was a world away from the emotional chaos of the night before. Marcus stood up as I entered, his face etched with concern. "Samuel, how are you holding up?" "I've had better nights," I said, sitting down in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. "Show me." He slid a document across the polished surface of the desk. It was a high-quality copy of the Power of Attorney. I picked it up, my hand surprisingly steady. I saw the pages of financial jargon, the places where my signature was neatly forged or perhaps even traced. And then I saw at the final signature page the one I recognized. It was my signature, bold and clear. But the page it was attached to was a declaration of total financial surrender. "It's a classic bait and switch," Marcus explained, his voice calm and analytical. "It's a predator's move. They give you a stack of legitimate, or at least harmless-looking documents. You get into a rhythm. Sign here, sign here. You're not reading every word because you trust the person sitting across from you. Why would you? It's your family." Then somewhere in the middle, they slip in the kill shot. A single page that gives them everything. The signature page looks identical to the others. You sign it without a second thought. I stared at my own name on the page, a signature I had used to build a company, to sign contracts, to create a life for my family. Now, it had been turned into a weapon against me, my own daughter, Marcus. I said the words, tasting like poison. She just sat there and watched him do it, watched him hand me the pen. The emotional betrayal is the deepest cut. "Samuel, he said, leaning forward, "and your anger is justified, every ounce of it. You have every right to storm over there and confront them. But I'm advising you as your lawyer and as your friend not to do that." An emotional reaction is what they expect. It's what they're prepared for. They'll deny everything, call you confused and paranoid. They will use your anger against you. I looked out the window at the bustling Miami streets below. For 45 years, I had built things: houses, office buildings, community centers. I never started a project without a detailed plan. I never laid a single brick without knowing the exact dimensions of the entire structure. I understood foundations and stress points and the slow, patient work of building something strong enough to withstand a storm. My rage wanted a storm now. It wanted to smash everything to pieces. But the builder in me knew better. Marcus was right. A direct assault would be foolish. This wasn't a brawl. It was a siege. I turned back to face him, my mind clear for the first time in 15 hours. The pain was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But I could wall it off. I could use its heat as fuel. "You're right," I said, my voice low and steady. "The man who built a construction empire from nothing doesn't win by throwing punches. He wins by being smarter. So tell me the plan, Marcus. How do we tear their world down brick by brick?" A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. It was the smile of a lawyer who knew he had a winning case. "Now you sound like the Samuel Harrington I know," he said. "The plan is simple, but it will require a great deal of control on your part. We let them think they've won. We let them think you're the sad, confused old man they want you to be. You're going to call them this afternoon. You're going to tell them you've thought about their suggestion and that they are right. It is time to sell the house." The words felt like a betrayal to Beatrice's memory, but I understood the strategy. "You want me to let the wolves into the sheep pen?" "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "We need to see their entire hand. How will they handle the sale? Which realtor will they use? Where will they try to divert the money? Every step they take from here on out will be another nail in their own coffin. We will document everything. We will build a case so airtight, so undeniable that when we finally confront them, they will have nowhere to run." I stood up, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The grief had not vanished, but it had been transformed. It had been sharpened into a tool. "All right, Marcus," I said, extending my hand across the desk. "Let's let them get started on digging their own graves." I left Marcus's office and stepped out into the bright Miami morning. The city was bustling with life, people rushing to work, trucks making deliveries, the normal rhythm of a Monday. 15 hours ago, I had felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Now I felt grounded. The rage and the pain hadn't vanished, but I had given them a job to do. They were no longer a flood threatening to drown me. They were the engine of a machine I was just beginning to build. Marcus had given me a name and an address written on a crisp sheet of his firm's letterhead. Rebecca Simmons, Investigations. The office wasn't in the gleaming glass towers of downtown. It was in a respectable but modest brick building in a neighborhood that valued hard work over flashy appearances. That was a good sign. The waiting room was small, clean, and impersonal. There was no soothing music or expensive art on the walls, just a few chairs and a coffee machine. A moment later, the door to the inner office opened and a woman stepped out. She was about 55, an African-American woman with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at a single glance. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was one of calm professional confidence. She wore a simple but well-tailored pantsuit, and her handshake was firm and brief. "Mr. Harrington." "I'm Rebecca Simmons," Marcus called ahead. "Please come in." Her office was like her, tidy, organized, and completely without frills. A large desk, a computer, 2 chairs, and a series of locked filing cabinets. There was a single-frame photo on her desk of a smiling young man in a graduation gown. Everything about the space said that this was a place for serious work. She gestured for me to sit, and then took her seat opposite me, her hands folded on the desk. She didn't offer condolences or ask me how I was feeling. She simply waited for me to speak. I appreciated that. I wasn't there for sympathy. I was there for ammunition. I got straight to the point. "Ms. Simmons, Marcus Hale recommended you highly. I have a sensitive family matter that has become a legal one. It concerns my son-in-law, Derek Morrison." She picked up a pen and a fresh legal pad, her eyes never leaving mine. "Go on." "I believe he has committed significant financial fraud against me, using my trust to gain control of my assets," I explained. "I need to know everything about him. Not what he claims to be, but what he actually is. Where he came from, his financial history, his professional background. I need to know every secret he's hiding." She listened without interruption, making a few short, precise notes on the pad. Her focus was absolute. It was comforting to be in the presence of such quiet competence after being surrounded by so much loud deceit. When I finished, she asked a series of short, practical questions. "His date of birth. I can get it for you. A recent photograph. I have several on my phone. Any known addresses before he moved to Miami." He told us he came from a small town in Illinois. Springfield. She wrote that down, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "And what is his stated profession?" "He calls himself a financial advisor, an investment specialist." She made a final note and then set her pen down, placing it perfectly parallel to the edge of the pad. "Mr. Harrington, my services are not cheap. My hourly rate is $300 plus expenses. I require a $6,000 retainer to begin an investigation of this nature." I didn't hesitate. I took out my checkbook from my jacket pocket, wrote out the check for the full amount, and slid it across the desk to her. For the past year, I had been writing checks to fund a fantasy. This was the first check I had written to uncover the truth. It felt like the best money I had ever spent. She glanced at the check, then looked back at me. "I will begin immediately. You'll have a preliminary background report within 72 hours. Anything deeper will take more time. I am discreet and I am thorough. You will receive a detailed report of all my findings and a fully itemized invoice." "Is there anything else?" "No, Ms. Simmons," I said, standing up. "That's all for now." As I walked out of her office and back into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was no longer alone in this fight. The loving father had been forced to step back. The meticulous builder had taken over, and I had just hired my first subcontractor. Derek and Lila thought they were playing a simple game against a tired old man. They had no idea I was bringing in a team of professionals to change the rules. They had started this, but I was going to finish it. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. I made the phone call as Marcus and I had planned. My voice was a carefully constructed instrument of feigned resignation. I told Lila and Derek that I had thought it over and they were right. The old house was too much for me. It was time to downsize, to sell it, and to invest the proceeds wisely for the future. The joy in Derek's voice was sickeningly genuine. He immediately started talking about realtors and market values, promising to handle everything. Layla said she was relieved that I was finally being sensible. Her words were like a dozen tiny paper cuts across my heart. I played the part of the compliant old fool perfectly, but every moment felt like a betrayal to Beatrice's memory. Every polite conversation was an act of war. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I met Rebecca Simmons at a quiet coffee shop far from my usual neighborhood. It was a place with worn wooden tables and the rich smell of roasted coffee beans. It felt anonymous, safe. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth in the back corner, a plain manila folder on the table in front of her. She was nursing a black coffee and watching the door. Her eyes met mine as I walked in, and she gave a slight nod. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary pleasantries. I slid into the booth opposite her. Miss Simmons, Mr. Harrington? She replied, her voice low and even. I have your preliminary report. She opened the folder. It contained about a dozen pages of neatly typed text and what looked like printouts of official records. She didn't hand it to me. She used a pen to point to specific lines as she spoke, guiding me through the architecture of my son-in-law's deceit. Let's start with the basics, she began. Derek Morrison is not currently a licensed financial advisor in the state of Florida. In fact, he isn't licensed anywhere in the United States. His last license issued in Illinois expired 4 years ago and was not renewed due to an ethics violation he failed to report. The first brick in the wall of his lies crumbled. The entire foundation of his professional identity was a fraud, an ethics violation. Failure to disclose a conflict of interest with a client, she said flatly. The details are sealed, but the fact is on the public record. For the last 4 years, his career has been a complete fabrication. I just knotted my jaw tight. The man who had condescendingly told me not to worry about complicated financial jargon wasn't even qualified to give financial advice. Next, Rebecca continued, turning a page. His company, Morrison Investment Partners. It exists on paper. It was registered as a single-member LLC 2 years ago, shortly after he married your daughter. The registered address is a P.O. box at a mail facility in a strip mall. The company has no physical office, no employees, and no official record of any investment transactions with the SEC. It is a classic shell company designed for one purpose: to move money. She showed me a simple diagram, a box labeled Your Account with an arrow pointing to a box labeled Morrison Investment Partners, LLC. From there, 3 other arrows pointed outwards to boxes labeled with the names of other LLCs I had never heard of. He's layering it. She explained, making the money harder to trace by bouncing it between ghost accounts. My money, the $500,000 I had given him over the past year for my grandson's college fund for Lila's business for their future. It hadn't been invested. It had been swallowed by a black hole of corporate fiction. Now for his history. Rebecca said, her voice unchanged. You mentioned he was from Springfield, Illinois. He did live there, but he didn't move to Miami for a career opportunity. Mr. Harrington, it appears he fled. She slid a document across the table. It was a copy of a court filing. This is a lawsuit filed against him and his previous company, Morrison Renovations, by a construction supplier for $40,000 in unpaid invoices. He dissolved the company and declared bankruptcy before they could collect. There are 2 other similar suits from former clients who claimed he took their deposits for renovation work that was never completed. I stared at the legal documents. Derek the financial wizard was nothing more than a common contractor who didn't pay his bills, a petty thief who had simply scaled up his operations. The shame I felt was immense. Shame for being so blind, for being such an easy target. He told us he came from a good family, I murmured. That his father was a doctor. Rebecca turned to the last page in her folder. His father was not a doctor, Mr. Harrington. He was a used car salesman who passed away 12 years ago. Derek Morrison has constructed his entire life, his entire identity, from a series of calculated lies. He saw you and your family's good name as a resource. He married into a respected family in a new city to escape his past and find a wealthier class of victim. I leaned back in the booth, the coffee in front of me untouched. Every word Rebecca said made a sickening kind of sense. It explained Derek's constant need for cash, his flashy lifestyle that always seemed to be funded by my money, his smooth practice charm. He wasn't just a bad husband or a greedy son-in-law. He was a professional predator. and he had been hunting in my family for years. The pain of that realization was sharp, but underneath it, the cold resolve I had found in my study began to harden into something unbreakable. I looked at Rebecca. The facts were laid bare. The lies were exposed, but I knew this was only the surface. These lawsuits in Illinois. I asked, my voice steady. The business partners, the clients. Is there a list of names? I want to know who else this man has hurt. Rebecca looked at me, her expression unreadable. I'm still digging into his personal connections there, Mr. Harrington. There are some inconsistencies in his public records, his marital status, his dependents. Something doesn't add up. A week passed. It was the most surreal and difficult week of my life. I spoke with Derek and Lila almost every day. I played the role of the agreeable father, nodding along as Derek discussed real estate agents and market analysis for my home. He had already picked one, a slick young man from a fancy downtown firm. Derek was moving fast, eager to liquidate my life's work. I had to listen to him talk about staging my home, getting rid of my personal belongings to make it more appealing to buyers. He was talking about erasing the memories of Beatrice and me as if he were discussing a fresh coat of paint. My daughter Lila stood by his side, a willing echo. She would call me with cheerful updates, her voice brimming with a false enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. She told me how proud she was that I was finally making smart financial decisions for my future. I swallowed my rage and played my part. But with every phone call, every fake smile, every moment of this grand deception, a piece of my heart was turning to stone. On the 8th day, Rebecca called. Her voice was different from our first meeting. It had a new edge to it, a grim seriousness. "We need to meet," she said. Not on the phone. The same place. We met at the coffee shop. This time, the quiet anonymity of the place felt less like a safe house and more like a tomb. Rebecca didn't waste any time. She opened a new folder on the table, but this one was thicker. It contained photographs. The inconsistencies I mentioned in Illinois, she began, her voice low. They weren't just financial, they were personal. After our last meeting, I decided to take a trip. I flew to Chicago and drove down to Springfield. My breath caught in my chest. She had gone there. She had walked the same streets as that ghost from my son-in-law's past. The public records were a good start, she continued. But records can be dry. I wanted to see the reality on the ground. I found the property records for a 4-bedroom house on a quiet suburban street. It was purchased 6 years ago, not long after Lila and Derek were married. The deed listed 2 owners, Derek Morrison and Sophia Morrison. Sophia. The name was a phantom, a whisper of a life I knew nothing about. I needed a pretext to get inside, Rebecca explained. So I posed as a freelance researcher for a new family magazine doing a feature on life in the suburbs. I told her I was gathering stories from local families. Rebecca slid the first photograph across the table. It was of the house. It was beautiful. A 2-story home with blue siding, a wide front porch, and a perfectly manicured lawn. There was a child's bicycle parked on the driveway. It was the kind of house where a family was supposed to be happy. She invited me in. Rebecca said, "Her name is Sophia Morrison. She's 42 years old, a former school teacher, now a stay-at-home mom. She was friendly, open, and proud of the life she had built. She offered me iced tea." Rebecca's voice was completely devoid of emotion, which made her story all the more chilling. She was simply reporting the facts. "She has 2 children," Rebecca said, sliding 2 more photos across the table. They were candid shots taken from a distance. One was of a little boy, maybe 7 years old, kicking a soccer ball in the yard. The other was of a girl a little younger, with bright blonde hair, riding the bicycle I had seen in the driveway. They looked happy, healthy, completely innocent. She talked about her husband. Rebecca's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something almost like pity. She said her husband Derek worked in the energy sector. She said his job was based in California and required him to travel constantly, sometimes for weeks at a time. She said he was a wonderful provider and a loving, dedicated father who worked tirelessly to give his family the best of everything. Every word was a hammer blow. California, the energy sector. The lies were so elaborate, so complete. He had built an entirely different narrative for his other life. She showed me around the house. Rebecca went on. She was proud of the new kitchen they had just renovated. She pointed out the swing set in the backyard that Derek had built for the kids on his last trip home. And then I saw it on the mantelpiece in the living room. She pushed the final photograph towards me, and the world stopped. It was a professional family portrait. There was Derek, his arm wrapped around Sophia, a wide, loving smile on his face. In front of them stood their two children, the boy and the girl. They were all dressed in matching colors, a perfect, smiling, all-American family. My son-in-law, the man who ate at my table every Sunday, living a complete lie with another woman, another family. I stared at the photograph, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the deception, the expensive car, the fine dining, the talk of investments. It wasn't for Lila, it was for them. My money, my life savings had paid for this house, this kitchen, this perfect suburban life. I had been funding my own betrayal. I felt a strange and terrible pity for the woman in the photograph, Sophia. She was a victim in this too, her entire life. A sham built on my stolen legacy and her children, those innocent children. Their father was a monster. But the deepest pain was for Lila. What was she in this twisted equation? Was she his partner? Or was she just the key to unlocking my wealth, the foundation for his entire fraudulent world? I didn't know which was worse, to be a villain or to be a fool so completely and utterly used that your whole marriage was nothing but a tool in a larger con. Rebecca let the silence sit for a long moment, letting the full weight of the discovery settle over me. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out one last document. She didn't slide it over. She placed it gently in front of me. I went to the county courthouse after I left her house. She said softly, "It's a matter of public record. You deserve to see the truth." It was a copy of a marriage certificate. The names on the certificate were Derek Morrison and Sophia Bennett. The date of the marriage was 12 years ago, 2 full years before he had ever met my daughter. I looked at the piece of paper, the official seal, the looping signatures. It was undeniable proof. He hadn't just lied. He hadn't just cheated. He had committed bigamy. He had built 2 separate lives, 2 separate families, one in the light and one in the shadows. He had built an entire world on a foundation of my money and my daughter's heart. And I knew with a certainty that burned colder and brighter than any rage I had ever felt that it was my job, my final duty as a father, to burn that world to the ground. The photograph of Derek's other family felt like a permanent brand on my mind. For days after seeing it, I lived in a state of cold clarity. The pain and the shock were still there, but they had been packed down deep, replaced by an icy sense of purpose. I continued to play the part of the willing father. I met with the realtor. Derek had chosen a young man with a smile as slick as his gelled hair. I nodded and agreed as he talked about curb appeal and neutral color palettes. I let them walk through the house, the home Beatrice and I had built, pointing out features to market, talking about my life's work, as if it were just another property listing, and all the while I waited for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. The call came from Marcus a week later. "We're ready, Samuel," he said. "It's time you saw the whole picture." I met him at his office. This time we didn't sit in his personal study. He led me to a large formal conference room. Rebecca was already there, and with her was a man I didn't know. He was older than me, with sharp eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and a perfectly tailored suit. Samuel, Marcus said, "I'd like you to meet Edward Klein. He's the best forensic accountant in the state of Florida. He's been analyzing the financial records we subpoenaed from Derek's LLCs. Mr. Klein stood and shook my hand. His grip was firm, his expression serious. "Mr. Harrington," he said, "what your son-in-law has done is both brazen and meticulously planned." He gestured towards a large screen on the wall. With a click of a button, it lit up, showing a complex flowchart. It looked like a spider's web. At the very top was a single box with my name on it. From that box, a thick line descended to another box labeled Morrison Investment Partners, LLC. From there, the web exploded into a dozen smaller lines and boxes. It was the anatomy of my betrayal laid out in stark black and white over the last 24 months. Mr. Klein began, his voice calm and precise as he pointed to the top of the chart. "You made 5 separate transfers to Morrison Investment Partners. The total sum was $520,000. You were told this was seed money for various investments." He pointed to the dates of each transfer. I recognized them instantly. The $60,000 in April that Derek had said was for an urgent deposit on a commercial property. It was actually the exact amount needed for a semester's tuition at Willowbrook Academy in Illinois. The $120,000 in August that was meant to secure a partnership in a tech startup. It had been transferred on the same day a large payment was made on a home equity line of credit for the house on Maple Drive. Every transfer, every dollar, was a lie I had willingly funded. Morrison Investment Partners did nothing with your money, Mr. Klein continued. It acted as a simple collection point. Within 24 hours of each of your transfers, the funds were immediately broken up and funneled out to 3 other shell corporations. He pointed to the next layer of the web. The boxes had bland corporate names: Central Distribution Services Summit, Capital Alliance, Polaris Real Estate. These companies are ghosts, Marcus chimed in. They're registered in Delaware and Wyoming, which have very lax corporate disclosure laws. They exist only as bank accounts designed to obscure the original source of the money. It's a classic money laundering technique. Mr. Klein then moved to the final layer of the chart, the dozens of smaller lines that spread out from the shell companies like veins. This, he said, his voice grim, is where your money went, Mr. Harrington. He brought up a series of bank statements on the screen, each one a damning piece of evidence. He walked me through them one by one. From Central Distribution Services, we see a recurring monthly payment of $3,950 to a mortgage company in Illinois. It's for the property where Sophia Morrison and her children reside. My money was paying the mortgage for my son-in-law's secret family. From Summit Capital Alliance, we see 2 monthly car payments, one for an Audi Q7, the other for a Lincoln Navigator. Both vehicles are registered in Sophia Morrison's name. The total is just over $2,100 a month. I remember Lila telling me they were struggling to make their own car payments last year. I had given them $15,000 to help them catch up. And finally, from Polaris Real Estate, we see the most direct transfers. Mr. Klein said a single payment of $30,000 to the Willowbrook Academy, the tuition for 2 children, and dozens of cash withdrawals from ATMs in the greater Chicago area. Never more than $8,000 at a time to stay under the federal transaction reporting threshold. He was bleeding you dry systematically to fund a completely separate life. I stared at the screen at the undeniable proof, the numbers, the dates, the account statements. It was a signed confession in dollars and cents. The shame I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a feeling as cold and hard as granite. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had used my love for my daughter as a weapon against me. He had turned my generosity into a fuel source for his monstrous deception. He had taken the fruits of my life's labor, the money I had earned through 45 years of sweat and grit, and used it to build a monument to his own greed. I looked at Marcus, then at Rebecca. I saw the grim understanding in their eyes. They weren't just my legal team anymore. They were my generals in a war I never wanted to fight, but now was determined to win this whole time. I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He was complaining about money pushing me to sell my house for more capital. The original $520,000 was just the seed money. Marcus said the $3.2 million loan he tried to get. That was the main event. He was going to drain you completely, then disappear, leaving you and Lila with nothing but debt. I looked back at the spider's web on the screen. It was complex, ugly, and evil. But for the first time, I didn't see chaos. I saw a map that showed me exactly where the enemy was hiding. I finally understood the full scope of his operation, and now I knew exactly where to strike. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. By day, I was the agreeable father getting my affairs in order. I sorted through old photographs with Lila, letting her pack away Beatrice's belongings into boxes. Each item was a fresh stab to the heart, but I showed no pain. I listened patiently as Derek gave me patronizing updates on the overwhelming interest in my house. But by night, I was a general planning a campaign. I had long phone calls with Marcus and Rebecca, piecing together the final elements of our case. Every financial record, every lie was another piece of ammunition. The weight of the deception was heavy, but the thought of the coming reckoning gave me strength. They made their final move on a Tuesday evening. They didn't call first, they just showed up. I was in the kitchen washing my dinner plate when the doorbell rang through the glass. I could see both their cars. It was an ambush. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands, and put on the mask of the tired old man. "Dad, we were just in the neighborhood and we were worried," Lila said as I opened the door. Her voice was laced with a fake syrupy concern. Derek brushed past me into the living room. The realtor called us Dad. He said, his tone impatient. He said, "You canceled 2 viewings this week. The market is hot right now. If we don't move on this offer, we could lose it. These investors I've lined up for the capital are getting nervous." I feigned confusion. Oh, it's all just happening so fast. So many memories in this house. An old man needs a moment to breathe. Derek's smile vanished. The velvet glove came off. "See, this is what we're talking about," he said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "We're not sure you're appreciating the urgency here. You seem confused lately, forgetful." He walked closer to me, his expression a perfect blend of fake sympathy and menace. "Lila and I have been talking, Dad, and with you being so indecisive, we think it might be time for you to have a chat with a doctor, someone who can assess your capabilities just to make sure you're still competent enough to handle these big financial decisions. We can't let you put your own future at risk." There it was, the final unspeakable threat. It wasn't just about stealing my money anymore. They were threatening to steal my mind, my autonomy, my very identity. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my rights and lock me away while they picked my life's work clean like vultures. I looked past Derek to my daughter. She stood by the doorway, her arms crossed, refusing to meet my gaze. Her silence was her consent. In that single horrifying moment, any last lingering ember of hope I had for her vanished. They weren't just trying to rob me, they were trying to erase me. I let my shoulders slump. I allowed a look of fear and confusion to cross my face. I let them see the broken man they wanted me to be. "A doctor," I said, my voice trembling slightly. No, there's no need for that. I'm just old. I'm sorry." I looked at them, my expression pleading. "You're right. I'm being foolish. We'll do it your way." I saw the flash of victory in Derek's eyes. He put his arm around Lila in a triumphant hug. "Okay," I said with a heavy sigh of defeat. "I'll call Marcus in the morning. I'll tell him to drop the final papers for the sale. We can all meet at his office and sign everything. Let's just get it over with." They left my house that evening convinced they had won. They thought their final threat had been the blow that finally broke me. They had no idea they had just handed me the very weapon I needed. They had agreed to meet on my chosen battlefield surrounded by my army. They thought they were coming to a signing. They were actually walking into a judgment. The morning after their ambush was different. I woke up not with a sense of dread, but with a profound and chilling calm. The battle plan was complete. All the pieces were in place. All that was left was to sound the call and lure the enemy onto the field. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had signed away my trust, and drank a cup of black coffee. I felt no anger, no sadness. All of that had been burned away, leaving only the cold, hard metal of my resolve. At precisely 9:15, I picked up the phone. I didn't call Derek. I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Dad, is everything okay?" I let out a long, weary sigh. A sound I had practiced in my mind. It was the sound of utter defeat. "Lila, honey, it's me," I said, my voice soft and slightly. "I'm sorry about last night. You and Derek, you were right to be concerned. I haven't been myself lately." I heard a rustle on the other end of the line. She was putting me on speakerphone. Derek was listening in. "Good." "Oh, Dad. Oh." Lila said, her voice now filled with that familiar fake sympathy. "We were just worried. We love you." "I know you do." I lied. "I've been up all night thinking about it. You're young and you understand this modern world better than I do. I'm just an old builder. I've been holding on too tight to the past. It's time I let go. It's time I let you and Derek take the lead." There was a moment of stunned silence. It was the sound of predators realizing their prey had finally stopped running. I could almost hear the triumphant smile forming on Derek's face. "I just got off the phone with Marcus." I continued, my voice sounding tired and resigned. I gave him his instructions. I told him to draw up all the final paperwork for the sale of the house. And I told him to structure the new investment fund exactly as Derek designed it. All the proceeds from the house will go directly into it under his management. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Lila and a muffled exclamation of victory from Derek in the background. The bait was taken. Marcus said because of the size of the transaction, it's best if we all sign everything together in his office to make it fully legal and official. I said he has an opening in his schedule for us tomorrow morning at 10:30. Can you and Derek be there? Yes. Lila said the word bursting out of her full of poorly concealed glee. Yes, Dad. Of course we'll be there 10:30 a.m. Don't you worry about a thing. You're doing the right thing. We're so proud of you. Okay, honey, I said, letting my voice crack just a little. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone. The act was over. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the morning sun. The weary, defeated old man from the phone call vanished. My back straightened, my jaw set. The stage was set. The actors had been given their final cue. They thought they were coming to a signing ceremony to witness my final surrender and claim their prize. They had no idea they were walking into a judgment. The conference room at Marcus's firm was designed to project power. A long polished mahogany table reflected the ceiling lights like a dark mirror. The chairs were heavy black leather. On one wall, a massive screen was dark for now. I sat at the head of the table. Marcus was to my right, his files arranged in a neat stack. Rebecca was to my left, a silent observer. We were a united front, a panel of judges. We had been waiting for 15 minutes when the door opened and they walked in. Derek was beaming a picture of triumph. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and a costly timepiece. He was the victor coming to claim his spoils. Lila followed a step behind him. She looked nervous, but a relieved smile played on her lips. They thought this was the end of the fight. They had no idea it was the beginning of the verdict. Pops Marcus. Derek said, his voice booming with false warmth. Good morning. A great day for the Harrington family future, eh? He sat down opposite me, pulling out a gold pen. Lila sat beside him, placing her purse on the table. Marcus began, his voice as cold and flat as a legal document. Good morning. We have the closing documents for the sale of the house here. He slid a thick stack of papers to the center of the table and the formation documents for the new investment trust. Derek eagerly reached for them. Excellent. Let's get this done. Before we do, Marcus said, holding up a hand, there is one outstanding administrative matter to clear up. He reached into his folder and pulled out 2 documents, placing them directly in front of Derek. They were the fraudulent power of attorney and the rejected $3.2 million loan application. We received these from the bank, Marcus said. Perhaps you can explain them. I watched Derek's face. It was a masterful performance. First came the look of confusion. He picked up the papers, squinting at them as if he'd never seen them before. What is this? I have no idea what this is. Then came the performance of dawning comprehension, followed by outrage. Is this a joke? My signature is on here. This is a forgery. Someone is trying to frame me. Dad, you have to believe me. Lila looked from the papers to her husband, her face pale. Dad, what's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. Derek would never do this. There must be a mistake. I remained silent. I just watched them. I watched my daughter defend the man who was actively destroying her life. It was a painful but necessary part of the process. She had to see the full performance before the mask came off. Derek stood up, leaning on the table, his voice rising with indignation. This is slander. I am a respected financial professional. To be accused of this, it's insane. Dad, you're getting old. You've been confused lately. Maybe you signed something you forgot about. He was trying to use the very weapon he had threatened me with, the suggestion that my mind was failing. It was a desperate move, and it was time for the next phase. Please sit down, Mr. Morrison. Marcus said, his voice cutting through Derek's bluster. Let's set the loan application aside for a moment. Instead, let's discuss the initial investment of $520,000 that you have been managing on Mr. Harrington's behalf. Marcus nodded to Rebecca. She pressed a button on a remote. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. On it was the spider's web, the flowchart of my stolen money. Derek stared at the screen, his mouth falling slightly open. Lila just looked confused. As you can see, Marcus said, standing up and using a laser pointer to trace the flow of money. Mr. Harrington's funds were first transferred to your holding company, Morrison Investment Partners. That's correct, Derek said, regaining some of his composure. That's our primary investment vehicle. A vehicle which then immediately dispersed the funds to three other shell corporations registered in Delaware. Marcus continued, his voice relentless, from which the money was not invested but spent. The screen changed. A bank statement appeared. This, Marcus said, the laser pointer, now a small red dot of damnation, is a recurring monthly payment of $3,950 for a mortgage on a house on Maple Drive in Springfield, Illinois. Would you care to explain that business expense? Mr. Morrison? Derek started to sweat. That's a corporate property, an asset for a long-term investment I'm developing in the Midwest. Lila was looking at him now, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. A corporate property. Derek, you told me all our investments were in tech stocks. Marcus ignored her. He was like a shark that had scented blood. He clicked the remote again. Another statement appeared, and these 2 monthly car payments for an Audi and a Lincoln Navigator registered to a woman named Sophia Morrison. Are these company cars? She's a consultant, Derek stammered, his lies becoming weaker, more pathetic. A business associate. And this, Marcus said, clicking again. The screen now showed a tuition bill, a $30,000 payment to the Willowbrook Academy for the education of 2 children. Are they scholarship recipients sponsored by your company? Lila made a small choking sound, the $30,000. Derek, you told me that was for my marketing budget. You told me my business needed it. She turned to him fully, now her face a mess of confusion and betrayal. Derek, what is this? What is going on? He was cornered. He looked from his wife to me to Marcus, a trapped animal searching for an escape. He found none. I decided it was time for me to finally speak. I had sat in silence long enough. I leaned forward, my voice calm and steady. Derek, I said, you talk about business associates in Illinois. You seem to have a lot of expenses there. Perhaps your primary consultant can clear this all up for us. Derek's face went white with terror. He knew what was coming. Marcus nodded to Rebecca again. She made a call on her cell phone. A moment later, the image on the screen changed. It was now a live video call. A pleasant-looking woman in a bright, sunny kitchen appeared. She was smiling. Hello, she said cheerfully. Is this Derek's office? Lila stared at the screen. Who is that? She whispered. Derek looked like he was about to be physically sick. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I spoke again, my voice gentle. Hello, Sophia. My name is Samuel Harrington. I'm a business partner of your husband's. We're all in a meeting here in Miami. How are you today? Sophia smiled brightly. Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Just getting the kids ready for their soccer game. That's wonderful, I said. We were just hoping that Derek would be able to make it home to you and the children this weekend. The woman's face lit up. Oh, I hope so. He's been away in California for so long on this trip. The kids miss their daddy terribly. California. The lie was so complete. My daughter finally turned her head from the screen to her husband. The look on her face was one of absolute devastation. The confusion was gone, replaced by a horrifying soul-shattering understanding. The man she had married did not exist. Derek. She breathed his name, a sound of pure agony. Marcus chose that moment to slide the final documents across the table. First, a photograph, the family portrait from the mantel in Illinois. Derek, Sophia, and their 2 smiling children. Then he placed the final document on top of it, the copy of their marriage certificate dated 12 years ago. As Lila stared at it, her mind finally breaking under the weight of it all, the conference room door opened. Rebecca stepped inside. She was not alone. 2 uniformed police officers followed her, their expressions grim and professional. Derek didn't even seem to notice them. He had buried his face in his hands, a broken man. His 2 worlds had just collided and completely annihilated him. Rebecca walked to the table and stood behind him. Derek Morrison, she said, her voice clear and official. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and Big Am. The officers pulled him to his feet. He didn't resist. He was a hollow shell. As they put his hands behind his back to cuff him, he finally looked up. He looked at me. His eyes were not angry. They were filled with a look of utter disbelief, the look of a master predator who had just been outsmarted by the one creature he thought was harmless prey. They led him out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving behind a devastating silence. The only sound was the heartbreaking sound of my daughter Lila, who had collapsed forward onto the table, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. I looked at the ruins of my family. I had won. I had protected my legacy and exposed the monster. But as I looked at my broken daughter, I felt no victory. I only felt the profound and terrible cost of the truth. The click of the conference room door shutting behind the police officers was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It severed the last tie to the life that was. The man my daughter had married was gone. The world she had built was gone. All that was left was the wreckage and silence. A silence so profound and heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. It was broken only by the sound of my daughter weeping. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. A raw, guttural sob of absolute desolation that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. She had collapsed forward onto the polished table, her head buried in her arms, her entire body shaking with the force of her grief. On the screen behind her, the smiling face of Sophia Morrison had been replaced by the spider's web of financial deceit. On the table in front of her, the marriage certificate and the family portrait lay like evidence at a crime scene, which they were. Marcus and Rebecca stood for a moment, their professional duties complete. They were silent and respectful. Rebecca gave me a single solemn nod, a look of grim understanding. Marcus cleared his throat softly. "Samuel," he said, "we will handle the official police statements and all the legal follow-up. You don't need to worry about any of that right now." I looked at him, my own eyes stinging. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." He nodded. "Take care of your daughter," he said. And then he and Rebecca slipped out of the room as quietly as they had entered, leaving me alone with my victory and my broken child. I had won. Every part of my meticulous plan had worked to perfection. The monster had been exposed. My legacy was secure. Justice was being served. But as I looked at Lila, there was no triumph in my heart. There was no satisfaction. There was only a vast aching emptiness. The cost of this victory was written in every shuddering sob that racked my daughter's body. I didn't see the woman who had stood by silently as her husband plotted to destroy me. I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms after I read her a bedtime story. I saw the proud teenager in her graduation gown, her future as bright as the sun. I saw the joyful bride walking down the aisle, her heart full of a love that had turned out to be the most vicious lie of all. For weeks, my anger at her had been a shield. It had protected me, hardened me, allowed me to do what needed to be done. But now, in the face of her absolute devastation, that shield crumbled into dust. All that was left was the unconditional and agonizing love of a father for his child. I stood up, my own legs feeling unsteady. I walked around the long table and pulled up the leather chair beside her. I didn't speak. I just sat there in the wreckage with her. After a moment, I reached out and placed my hand on her shaking back. She flinched at my touch as if expecting a blow or a word of condemnation, but I said nothing. I just kept my hand there, a steady, solid presence in the ruins of her world. Slowly, minute by minute, the hurricane of her sobs began to subside into a storm of ragged breaths and whimpers. She finally lifted her head. Her face was a swollen mess of tears and mascara. Her eyes were filled with a shame so profound I could hardly bear to look at them. "Dad," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about them." "Shh," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "We can talk about all that later. Not now. I was so stupid," she sobbed. "So blind. I believed him. I defended him." "He's gone now, Lila," I said softly, but with a strength I didn't know I had. "The lies are over. It's over." She looked around the cold, sterile conference room as if seeing it for the first time. She looked at the evidence of her shattered life scattered across the table. It was a prison of her own making, but she didn't deserve a life sentence. I stood up and gently pulled her chair back. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you out of here." She looked up at me, her eyes like a lost child's. "Where are we going?" "I'm taking you home," I said. And in that one word she understood everything, not to the empty house she had shared with a phantom, but home. To the brick house on the quiet street where she had grown up, the home that had been built not with lies, but with love. I helped her to her feet and she leaned on me, her body weak with exhaustion and grief. And together we walked out of that room, leaving the wreckage of her old life behind for someone else to clean up. The road ahead was long, and I knew the work of rebuilding would be harder than any construction project I had ever managed. But as I held my daughter, I knew one thing for certain. We would build it together. For 4 days, my house was a sanctuary of silence. Lila slept in her old childhood bedroom, a room that hadn't been used in 25 years. She barely ate. She didn't answer her phone, which rang constantly with calls from friends wanting to know about the rumors that were starting to spread. I didn't press her. I made her soup and tea. I sat in my armchair in the living room while she lay on the sofa under a blanket just staring at the ceiling. I was giving her time. Time for the shock to wear off. Time for the deafening noise of the explosion to fade so she could begin to hear her own thoughts again. Grief is a solitary journey, and I knew I couldn't walk the path for her. All I could do was make sure she knew she wasn't walking it alone. On the 5th evening, she finally spoke. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, and she came and stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were puffy and red, but for the first time since that day in the conference room, they were clear. "Dad!" Her voice was a fragile whisper. "Can we talk?" I dried my hands and turned to face her. "Of course, honey, always." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had unwittingly signed the papers that almost destroyed us. The evening light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. She took a shaky breath before she began. "I need you to know." She started staring at her hands clasped on the table. "I didn't know about the other family. If I had known, I swear to you I would have." Her voice broke. "I know you wouldn't have," I said softly. "And I did. In my heart, I knew that much was true. But that doesn't excuse it," she said, looking up at me, her eyes swimming with tears and a shame that was painful to witness. "It doesn't excuse any of it. I stood by and I let him use you. I let him lie to you, and I lied too. I just listened." This was her confession. This was the poison she had to draw out before she could begin to heal. "I was a failure, Dad," she said, the words tumbling out now. "My business, the boutique, it was drowning. I was so in debt I couldn't sleep at night, but I was too proud, too ashamed to tell you. You built an empire from nothing. You were always so strong, so successful, and I couldn't even keep a small shop afloat. I felt like such a disappointment." Her words hit me harder than any of Derek's lies. The thought that my own success had become a wall between me and my daughter was a special kind of pain. And then there was Derek, she continued. He was so confident, so charming. He made it all sound so easy. He told me he could fix everything. He made me feel like a success again. I wanted to believe him so badly, Dad. I chose to believe the beautiful lie because the ugly truth was just too hard to face. I let him convince me that you were old-fashioned, that you didn't understand modern finance. He slowly built a wall between us, brick by brick, and I handed him the mortar. She finally broke down, her face crumbling into her hands. "When he had you sign those papers," she sobbed, "I didn't know what was in them, but I knew it was wrong. I knew he was rushing you and taking advantage of your trust. And I stood there. I just stood there and said nothing. And that's the worst part. I did nothing. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. "Listen to me, Lila," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "What he did was the work of a monster. He is a predator who preys on trust and love. The blame for his actions belongs to him and him alone." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But you're right. You made mistakes. You let your pride and your fear make you blind. You stood by when you should have spoken up. That is your truth to own, and it will be a heavy burden to carry." She flinched, expecting a lecture, a condemnation. But I had no more anger left for her. "Maybe I made some mistakes too," I said quietly. "Maybe I was so busy being the successful father that I never made it safe for you to be the daughter who was struggling. Maybe I never told you that my love for you has nothing to do with your successes or your failures. That is my truth to own." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Look at me," I said. She lifted her eyes to mine. "I spent my whole life building things. Lila houses buildings. And I learned one very important lesson. Strength isn't about building something that never breaks. Everything breaks sooner or later. Storms come, foundations crack. Real strength is in the rebuilding. It's in what you do after it is all fallen down. You have to have the courage to look at the rubble honestly. You have to clear away the broken pieces and then you start over. You lay a new foundation one brick at a time, a foundation made of truth. I squeezed her hand. What he built was a house of cards, and it's gone. What we have, you and I. The foundation is damaged. It's cracked, but it's still there. And we can fix it. We can rebuild it together. But it has to be built on honesty. No more shame, no more secrets. For the first time in years, I saw the daughter I remembered. Not the nervous accomplice or the broken victim, but my Lila. Her eyes cleared and she gave me a small, watery smile. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Okay, one brick at a time. 9 months can feel like a lifetime." The raw, gaping wound of that day in the conference room has slowly begun to heal into a scar. It will always be there, a reminder of the battle we fought, but it no longer aches with every breath. Spring has come to Miami. The air is warm and filled with the scent of jasmine and newly cut grass. I spend most of my afternoons now in the garden, the one Beatrice and I planted together so many years ago. But today I am not alone. Lila is kneeling beside me, her hands covered in rich, dark soil as we plant a new row of tomato seedlings. There's a lightness to her now, a peace in her eyes that I haven't seen in years. She has seen a therapist twice a week. She is taking business classes at the local college, learning to build something that is honestly and truly her own. She is slowly finding her way back to the strong, capable woman I always knew she was. Derek took a plea deal. The evidence against him was so overwhelming he had no other choice. He's serving an 8-year sentence in a federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. The state of Illinois is still waiting its turn with the bigamy charges. He is a ghost, a footnote in a chapter of our lives that is now closed. Through Marcus, I made sure a portion of the recovered funds was anonymously placed into a trust for his children in Illinois. They were the truest victims in all of this. They deserved a chance at a future not built on their father's lies. Lila gently pats the soil around a young plant. She looks up at me, a genuine smile gracing her face. It's a smile that finally reaches her eyes. "Do you think they'll actually grow, Dad?" She asks, her voice clear and steady. I look at the small green shoots pushing up towards the sun. I look at my daughter, her face filled with a quiet hope. With a little patience and a lot of sunshine, I reply, "Anything can grow again." We work in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the birds in the old oak tree and the scrape of our trowels in the earth. The house stands behind us, peaceful and secure. It is no longer just a property to be defended. It is a home again. Our home. Later, we will go inside and cook dinner together in the kitchen, filling the rooms with laughter instead of secrets. I learned a hard lesson at 68 years old. I learned that a man's true legacy is not what he builds with brick and mortar, but what he is willing to fight to protect. And sometimes the most important work a builder can do is not to construct something new, but to rebuild what was broken. Derek had tried to steal my money, my assets, my future. But in the end, I had recovered something far more valuable. I had gotten my daughter back, and that was a fortune no con man in the world could ever touch. This ordeal taught me a hard lesson at 68 years old that the deepest wounds often come from the hands you trusted the most. My son-in-law was obsessed with my net worth, but he never understood my true value. He saw my life's work as a pile of cash to be stolen, not as a legacy built on integrity. I learned that true strength isn't just in building an empire, but in having the courage to tear down a house of lies to save the family inside. Protecting your assets is one thing, but rebuilding a broken relationship with your child brick by honest brick is the only inheritance that truly matters. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your family from a threat hiding in plain sight? Please share your experience in the comments below.